Preston Bell Charles III. Yeah, right? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dave.
And I'm Marcellus.
And this is True Theater. Yeah, all right. This is the first evening of our 14th season. Incredible. Thank you all for your support. The 14 seasons of building community through the sharing of true personal stories. Tonight's show is called trueHOOD, and the theme of the evening are stories from and about the neighborhoods of Cincinnati.
Now, Cincinnati has 52 neighborhoods, and we don't have time to hit all of them. But we've managed to cover a few of them for you tonight. Now, Preston over here put out a documentary this year that does cover all 52, and we'll hear more about that later.
Yes, we will. And do we have any first-timers here tonight? Any first-timers? I see a couple of hands, but I really can't see people. Thank you all for coming. You're going to really enjoy it. For all your information, we have T-shirts for sale, and there's like a 3-show subscription you could buy to fill out for single ticket holders tonight. A way to make donations, a selfie stand with some prizes attached to that, and anything that needs explanation, we'll be sharing a little bit more about it during the first act.
And for any of you watching from home, we're coming to you from the downtown Cincinnati, Ohio area in the beautiful and historic Memorial Hall.
Yes, and a big, huge thank you to the staff here for always making us feel welcome. Yep, thank you. Huge, yeah, thank you. And also a big thank you to the Norse Media, the student-run Northern Kentucky University media organization, which is live streaming tonight's event and sponsors the equipment rental, making the live stream affordable for us.
Now, affordable doesn't mean free. So if you're watching from home for free,
or if anyone here is interested in paying it forward so future audiences can enjoy the live stream as well,
then we're more than happy to accept your donations. Now, donations can be made easily through our website or by texting the code TRUE14 to the number 44321. That's true, like theater, 14th, like the season, to number 44321. You'll receive a link back from there, and it'll be obvious to do after that.
I know some of you have already donated. To those of you who have, thank you so very much. Very appreciated all the time, and it really does go a long way to helping us continue sharing these true personal stories with the people who can make it and the people who are geographically inconvenienced or for whatever reason are watching from home. I have other things I was going to say about donating because you want to hear more about donating. I was going to say thanks in advance to all of you who will feel guilted by the end of tonight. I mean inspired by the end of tonight to share more stories. I repeated that just to make the joke. My timing was way off, but I had to make the joke. So anyway, thank you.
But wait, there's more. There are also a couple of ways that those of you present can support True Theater further as well.
That's correct. You may have seen we've got T-shirts for sale right out there in the hallway. Smalls, medium, large, extra large, XXL, XXX. I think they're $20 each. Very easy to pay for, cash, credit. If the projector was working tonight, those of you at home can see this. My friend Heather was modeling a shirt she was wearing out in the wild when a stranger came up to her and started up a lovely conversation. So get your T-shirt, become the envy of your friends, and meet new people.
Also at intermission, one of our board members, Marissa, will be walking around with our new dip jar. Now this is a little something we're trying this year, and if you like what we do, and you want to make a quick donation to the cause, you can just dip your credit card into it, and a $10 donation will be made to True Theater. We're not too fancy. You can double dip here.
That's right.
You can dip with wild abandon. No one will be upset. It also makes a pleasing ka-ching sound each time you do it. So come be part of this cool experiment that we're trying and support True Theater today.
I did it once. It was a lot of fun. So, anyway, now what we're all here for.
You know, at True Theater, we always say that everyone has a story to tell, and the only difference between strangers and friends is the sharing of that story. Tonight, we're going to make 5 new friends and maybe be introduced to a few new neighborhoods. Westwood, for example, is a neighborhood located 7 miles northwest of downtown Cincinnati. Incorporated into a village in 1868, Westwood was home to James Gamble, who invented ivory soap and helped fund UC's Nippert Stadium. The neighborhood has an iconic town hall and is the city's largest neighborhood by area as well as population, with 29,950 residents. Our first storyteller tonight was raised there and has returned there as an adult, where she owns and operates Wondercade, an all-ages retro future arcade. She also works with the nonprofit IOBI, which stands for In Our Backyard, which helps neighborhood leaders throughout the region raise money to bring positive projects to life. Now, this is her third appearance at True Theater, and when she's not here or at the arcade, she likes to spend her free time hiking, making and enjoying music, and getting her teenage boys to shower. Please welcome Leslie Mattie Rich.
Hey, y'all. So, if you're anything like me, you have memories sitting down in front of PBS and hearing Mr. Rogers ask, "Won't you be my neighbor?" Or you might think of Bob from Sesame Street asking you, who are the people in your neighborhood? And these seemingly easy questions were very difficult for me to answer as a child. And the reason that they were difficult to answer is because I lived in the only residential house on my block of Harrison Avenue. And so when you close your eyes and think of a neighborhood, you probably think of kids in the street playing kick the can, elderly people putzing around in their gardens, and couples and families out enjoying their neighborhood. For me, I think of a UDF, a laundromat, a video store, a bakery, an Italian carryout, and most importantly, my dad's barbershop. My dad had a 16-step commute from our back door to his barbershop. It was amazing. He lived in a walkable neighborhood. Yeah. And until I was 12 years old, 90% of my life revolved around this block of Harrison Avenue. Now, my brother and I did have to leave the block for school, and that required us to sprint across Harrison Avenue and again across Boudinot and dodge cars in a real-life version of Frogger. And so when that game came out, I was great. And at the end of the school day, we'd make that sprint back across, and we would float up the steps and into my dad's barbershop to let him know that we were home. Because unlike my brother and I and my dad, my mom actually left the block to go to work, but not the neighborhood. She worked in the ER up the street. And so we had to make sure that our dad knew we were home. And that is when my favorite after-school ritual started. My dad would open his turn-of-the-century cash drawer and pull out a crisp 20, because clean money is for customers. And he would say, "Take this and go over to UDF, buy something, and bring me back some change." And the reason that this is important is because my dad is a man out of time and operated a completely all-cash shop. And when we were kids, his chair was never empty. And so to run to the end of the block to the bank would probably mean that he would miss out on at least one, if not two customers. And my brother and I were pretty willing errand runners, because that meant we could get ice cream, or Garbage Pail Kids cards, or a slush puppy. It was pretty great. So when I entered 7th grade, I actually left the neighborhood, and I rode the cheese, what some of you might call the yellow bus, downtown to the School for Creative and Performing Arts. And I had always loved math, even going to an art school. And yes, we had real subjects there. And one day, I came and did my dad's errand after school, and I was in UDF, and I was talking to one of my favorite employees at UDF. His name was Dean, and he was getting his master's in math. And I was on the verge of failing math. And Dean was really interested in what was happening in school and asked about math. I was like, yeah, geometry has broken my brain. I don't know what I'm doing. All of a sudden, I am terrible at math. And he said to me, well, go run home and get your math book, and you can just hang out right down there at the end of the counter, and when there aren't customers, I'll help you with your geometry work. He did not have to do that. He could have scooped out my 2 scoops of Swiss chocolate almond in a cake cone and sent me home with the change for my dad. And instead, he was being a good neighbor. And around the same time, the Capreses opened Caprese Pizza at the end of the same strip mall. And this is when I discovered that carbs are my love language. Because they made the most amazing fresh-baked Italian bread. And I would go in and get it 3 times a week, because you've got to keep your energy up when you're sprinting across Harrison Avenue multiple times a day. And the Capreses were really interested in how my day was going, and they were very fascinated that I went to a high school that focused specifically on the arts. And one day I offhandedly mentioned that I was preparing for a voice recital where my teacher had assigned me to sing an Italian aria from Madame Butterfly. The Capreses' eyes lit up with excitement, and they asked me to sing for them. That excitement did not last very long, as I butchered the language that they loved, and instead of singing vedremo, my Midwest accent would pronounce it as vedremo. They looked like they were in physical pain, and they politely cut me off and said, "Do you have the music for that?" I said, "Oh yeah, I do. Well, go home and get it and come right back." The Capreses drilled me on my pronunciation until it was perfect. So much so that my voice teacher thought my parents had hired an Italian tutor. And when I came back and told the Capreses this while pulling off a little bit of Italian bread, they were beaming. They were so proud. They could have sold me a loaf of Italian bread and been done. And instead, they were my neighbors. One of the quirks about my dad's barbershop is a one-room shop, and it was built at the turn of the 20th century, and it did not have a bathroom. And so, if my dad's customers had to use the bathroom, they were sent up to our house. So we really thought nothing of some random stranger coming up to our back door, knocking on the door. "Oh, are you here to use the bathroom?" "Okay, yeah, it's right over there." And when I think about it, I do think that my dad probably sent some people up to the bathroom just to make sure that my brother and I weren't doing anything stupid. I did almost try to burn the house down when I was 3 because I forgot about some popcorn, so maybe he was, founded in this. But because of this, as a teenager, anytime I would go out into Westwood or the west side of town, I would run into somebody that would say, "Oh, you're Ken the barber's daughter." Like, yeah, okay. Now I know that you're gonna report back to my dad, so I'm not gonna do anything wrong. I couldn't get away with anything. And on the weekends, my brother and I would often sit in the barber shop reading the latest comic books and listening to my dad and his customers talk. My dad knew so much about his customers. I don't understand how he kept it all straight. And anytime a customer would pull up to the parking meter in front of his shop, he would float down the steps before the customer could get out of the car and feed that meter with a dime. None of his customers were going to pay for parking. Kids that came to get their hair cut were showered with balloons and dum-dum suckers and bubble gum. And when customers wouldn't show up for a while, my dad would go through his appointment book and check on them. Sometimes he would find out that a customer had lost their job and could not afford to get a haircut. And without hesitation, my dad would say to them, well, as soon as you have a job interview, come in and we will get your haircut because you have to look sharp for that interview. And customers would come in and celebrate with him when they got that job. And of course, my dad would 100% attribute it to the haircut. Sometimes when he would make these check-in calls, he would learn the customers were in bad health and they couldn't make it to the shop. And so on his days off or on a weekday after working 10 hours, he would hop in his Datsun and drive to a customer's house or to the nursing home to give him a haircut. And he would never accept money for it. My dad was extravagantly generous. And that was his way of being a good neighbor. And when I left for college, things on my block of Harrison Avenue left too. First the UDF, then the bakery, then the video store, then the Capreses, and then the laundromat. And when I came back to the neighborhood in 2004, 75% of our business district was vacant, and our two major corners were held down by check cashing places. And yet, my dad was still there in his one-room shop, keeping the West Side looking tight. The neighborhood of my childhood that had held so much joy and magic had become a place of desolation and despair. Westwood was a place that people stayed, not a place that they lived. And I bought into that. The house I had just bought, I viewed it as a place that I would stay for 2 years and then move to a better zip code somewhere else in the city. But as luck would have it, my interest in the arts connected me with neighbors that were interested in getting an artworks mural on the side of what was Henke Winery. And that mural would birth a community group called Westwood Works. And as neighbors started sharing their hopes for what Westwood could be again, we gathered neighbors to talk about what was positive and possible. And soon, neighbors opened coffee shops and a brewery and restaurants. And the city also took notice. And they invested $3 million in a park in our community. And Westwood Works held pop-up beer gardens and art shows and street festivals to connect neighbors and build a community where neighbors could offer their gifts to one another. And Westwood Works also really helped me fall in love with my neighborhood again. And I followed in my dad's footsteps and opened my own business, an arcade, a block away from my dad's shop. And as I thought about what I wanted this business to be. It, of course, had to have Frogger. But I was brought back to Dean and the Capreses and my dad. And I wanted this place to be somewhere where community showed up and was built and care was evident. And that is why we made decisions to hire exclusively from our neighborhood and to pay people fairly for their labor and to keep our admission low so that as many people in our community could come in and leave their worries outside and have some fun. The night before Wondercade opened, my dad was rushed to the ER. And as I sat there with my mom until 3 a.m. when he made us go home, two thoughts ran through my head. 42 years is not enough time with you. And how would you want me to run this business? Wondercade opened on June 18th of 2021. And from the very beginning, I was reminded about how my dad would show up for people when things got rocky. And one night, it was cold and rainy, and a high school kid named David ducked into the arcade. He was like, I don't have any money, but I just need somewhere to sit until the bus comes. I only have enough money for bus fare. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. You can sit here. And I could tell that David was nervous, that his phone was gonna die before he got home. So I threw him a phone charger, and I grabbed him some water. And then he left and got on his bus. And then the next Friday, and the Friday after that, and the Friday after that, David kept showing up. Most of the time he didn't buy anything. Sometimes he could scrounge up enough for admission and he'd go play. And a little while later, one Friday night, David burst into the arcade. He's like, I'm getting an apartment. I was like, oh, okay, cool. But the more that my teammate and I heard David talk about this apartment, it became really clear that he didn't have anyone who was helping him or who cared about him. And so we grabbed a scrap of paper and said, hey, let's talk through all of the stuff that you actually need for this apartment. Because it was important to us that not only David get an apartment, that he could stay in an apartment, and he could live in this apartment. 2 years later, David is still in that apartment. But more importantly, David is my neighbor. My dad passed away last December, and on the night of his visitation, Wondercade was scheduled to host a fundraiser for my youngest son's elementary school. We could have canceled. Everyone would have understood. But I knew my dad would have wanted me to show up for the community. And that night, every Dater family who was coming to the arcade came to the visitation first. The principal of the school showed up, and our beloved community showed up for us because we had showed up for them. And in all of these times in Westwood, where many people would say that I live on a block that didn't have neighbors, I celebrate the 3200 block of Harrison Avenue, who said yes when I asked them, won't you be my neighbor?
One more time for Leslie. Also on the west side, in about 1796, settlers took interest in the area around a large spring, later named Beach Flat Spring, and in 1818, the original area known as Cheviot was officially mapped out. Technically not one of the 52 neighborhoods of Cincinnati, but you can write Cincinnati on an envelope and it'll get there. I know, I lived there for a while. And it is recognized also by locals as the heart of the West Side because of its urban yet small town friendly culture, and it features a concentrated variety of small businesses and pubs along its main thoroughfares. Others who may not live there might have some preconceived notions about the neighborhood that our next storyteller is going to touch on. He's an award-winning Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or JEDI, consultant with 14 plus years of experience and currently serves as the vice president of a nonprofit, as the vice president of DE&I at a large Cincinnati-based nonprofit which focuses on foster care, adoption, and mental health. Please welcome Brice Mickey.
I'm not used to having to lower a mic, but it's good to be with you all. My name's Brice Mickey, and I'm from Cheviot. I don't lead with that introduction very often for a number of the reasons. I think I even heard some folks in here tonight giggle a bit, and I'm used to that. I think Cheviot comes with preconceived notions that I'm familiar with. One, I remember folks thinking that Cheviot was a place that you never left. You're born there, you just stay there. And the age of my neighbors might have led you to believe that. Two, that it was full of a lot of folks, maybe backward thinking, maybe racist. I firmly believe that there's racism in every neighborhood and all 52 neighborhoods in the city. And there was a special brand in Cheviot that I grew accustomed to. My first experience with it that I can remember was in kindergarten at Cheviot Elementary. I had a kindergarten teacher named Mrs. Stevens. Sometimes I try and think about her, but have you ever seen the Muppet Babies? That's all I remember is a long pair of calves with funny socks. But I do remember I was dating Sarah Dorfline at the time, and Mrs. Stevens split the room into black students and white students. She asked the black students to sit on one side of the room and the white students to sit on the other. It's been 30 years. I don't know why, but I think about it a lot. I remember my girlfriend saying, please come to this side of the room. And she pulled me toward the white side of the room, and I went. I was like, yeah, I'm part white, I can go over there. But I remember a hand on top of those calves I was talking about, grabbing me by the arm and saying, no, you belong on that side of the room. I'm black, I'm white, and I'm Japanese. My grandmother's name is Mihoka Ohashi, if you need receipts. But there wasn't a Japanese side of the room in Cheviot. And I was just as much white as I was black, But I felt like I was put into a box. No, that is where you belong. And those experiences kept happening to me, unfortunately, at that elementary school. I'm fat. I am disabled, if the chair couldn't tell you. My poor eyesight probably would. And I'm gay. So, needless to say, Sarah and I broke up. That didn't last. And difference wasn't really celebrated, especially at that age, maybe especially in that part of town. I felt like people could see it, they could hear it in my voice. It was ever present, but especially for one kid named Blake. He picked on me mercilessly. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, come third grade, maybe fourth grade, I think I'd had enough. And so I decided I was gonna kick his ass. And I did it. I fought him in a gymnasium full of my classmates, and I throttled him. He was only this tall, to be fair, and I've probably been this size since third grade. So it was pretty easy, and something I thought about quite often. But it happened, and I was like, yeah. I remember standing there afterward feeling great, but I could hear his friends over in the corner saying, man, how did that feel? And I was like, pretty good. And they're like, why? He kicked your ass. And I said, what? Like, I demolished him. Like I throttled him. He's on the floor. Like he's completely out of breath. He can't do anything. I showed him. No, man. He got you. Did you see that one hit he got? Yeah, the one. What about the other 14? But I wasn't even in control of my own narrative. I beat my bully's ass, and I still couldn't control my narrative. People were still putting me in boxes and making me feel unseen and not included. So 5th grade, 6th grade come around, and then there was one day they said, we're gonna take the Walnut Hills test today. And I passed. And so I was like, yes, I'm getting out of Cheviot. Forget this backwater hellhole. Like, I'm going to the east side. Moving on up. And I passed by 1 point. But it gave me that recognition, right? Like, I'm better than this. I'm better than what happened to me at that school, and they better watch out. I'm going to the smart kids school. And so I go, 7th grade through senior year. And I was told every day, oh, Walnut, you must be a genius. I actually still hear that sometimes from folks in Cincinnati. It's a little weird. But oh, you went to Walnut, you must be so smart. That was 20 years ago, bruh. Yeah, I remember hearing it from teachers. I remember hearing it from the students and even the substitutes. I remember one substitute in particular, just every time you had her, oh, thank God you all are from Walnut. I wish you'd be quiet more often, but at least you're not like those kids at Taft or Withrow. We're at Walnut. You all are so much better. I remember squeezing a chalk sponge in her coffee, and still geniuses, all of you, every one of you. Walnut. I graduated Walnut with a 1.8 GPA. I got a job recently, and the person who interviewed me said, you must be a genius, you went to Walnut. And she's heard this story several times, and I wonder if she thinks like, man, a 1.8 GPA. And so imagine hearing that every day from every person, and still, and knowing somewhere deep down you don't belong, right? So maybe it was because of your identity and all these other things before, but now it's because of your brain. You're just not smart enough to fit in here. I graduated Walnut Hills, barely. I did get kicked out once. My mom begged the principal. She always joked that she pulled a Forrest Gump to get me back in there. I don't know what that meant because I didn't see the movie until later, and I was like, oh, I hope not, Mom. But I did graduate, again, just barely. I remember on graduation day, they said, where are you going to college? And I said, and they said, we'll just put UC. And so just Walnut has a 100% placement rate in college, folks. Just remember that. Whenever you hear that number, I was not even accepted into UC, but they said, we'll just put it down. So I did get into UC, thankfully. And for everything I said about Walnut, UC was actually much easier than high school was for me. No knock to UC, but it was easier. I made straight A's, and I went to school for IT. I did good. Again, straight A's, Dean's List every quarter. It was the first time I felt smart. I also was dating someone at the time who asked me to join this program. And I heard that folks who were more involved graduated, they got better jobs, and so I'm like, I'm gonna join any and everything. And so here it is, my boyfriend, my first and only, telling me, yeah, you should join this program called RAP that talks about race, gender, sexuality, like all these things that you talk about all the time. And I joined, and it changed my entire life. Light bulb moments. They treat you like this because you're fat. They treat you like this because you're queer. They treat you like this because you have a college degree. They treat you like this because you're a man, because you're tall. And it just became a belief system almost for me. And I could still talk about it so easily. It's interesting being in a room like this and being so nervous to speak when I've spoken to hundreds of people before about these same topics. But it's my passion, it's my field, it's where I found home. I used to have this story for when I was in IT, when recruiters would ask me like, so what made you do IT? I said, oh, well, I put together these computers when I was little, and I watched the pieces light up, and my mom and me would get so excited. It was a complete lie. But the recruiters ate that shit up. They were like, yes, this is who we need to program our VoIP phones. It's interesting because I'm in diversity and inclusion, and I found out later that my ex only got me to do that because he got a free t-shirt if he could get someone to join. And so now I tell folks that my career path, when the recruiters ask, well, what brought you to diversity and inclusion? My ex and a small t-shirt. I'm like, I hope he kept that. I hope it's hanging up somewhere, but probably not. Again, that program changed my life. I ended up working there, and I got awards. I got good awards. I wasn't used to being awarded for anything. You remember my grades in high school and my experience in elementary, but I got awards. I got a national award. I got an award from the county. I got 3 university-wide awards for running this program, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, my passion. I ended up leaving that program, and it's still at UC. I still miss it every day. But I went to consult. I got to go consult with companies all across the country and tell them, and virtually. I still lived in Cheviot. I never left. Didn't leave, right? I told you that. But I consulted virtually with folks all over the country, hospital systems, telling them how to treat people with respect, with dignity. using all of those lessons, all the bullying, is now what I use as fuel to connect with others who felt like they didn't belong. And I've loved that experience. I even got to work with a health system on the west side of town, right next to Cheviot. I remember very poignantly one story from a nurse there who was asking me my opinion on how she'd be more inclusive. And she was telling me a time where she was like, I probably could have done better. There were two people who came in, a man and a woman. They both didn't speak much English at all, barely any Spanish speakers, and the woman was going into labor. So she's laying down, and the man is asking about her, but the nurse can't understand very well. And so he kind of is sneaking off a little bit, and the nurse goes, you are going to stay with her. Shh, your wife is giving birth. Come on, get back over here. And he's like, no. And she can just tell he's not really into it. And she said, you're going to be here for the birth of your child. You're not leaving her alone. And so he's standing there, but he slowly starts to sneak off again. And this time she's pissed. She said, okay, buddy. Grabs him by the shoulders, stand over here, hold her hand while she is doing this. You are not going to leave her alone in this process. There wasn't a translator there at the time, but the translator did get there later. And to her surprise, they didn't know each other at all. He was sitting next to her at the bus stop when she went into labor, and they just happened to both speak Spanish. So I still think about both of their points of view on that day, laying there, holding hands with a stranger, while a nurse is telling him, look, hold her hand, and him looking and just, so, you can get it wrong, folks, and you probably will. I have too. I hope I was able to give her some advice. I honestly remember nothing else but that story from my time at that health system. And if the lesson I was trying to give you is that you will get it wrong, but use that story as fuel to not have as many preconceived notions, right? Because her preconceived notions led to a very awkward moment. That hospital system also had a hard time getting Latino folks in the door, and I always wonder how far that story spread. A little bit further after today. I think there were some other great moments. Another one was recently I was asked to come back to Cheviot Elementary in my new role as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Beach Acres Parenting Center. But I was asked to come back to Cheviot. This was 2 weeks ago, true story. And I was asked to tour the building and point out things that might not be inclusive, that might make people feel othered. In Cheviot, the same school where I remember very easily sitting on one side of the room feeling like I didn't belong. And now I got to bring lessons of belonging back to that same school. And that's really impactful for me. I also gave an implicit bias presentation at Walnut Hills like a month or two ago, and that went really well too. But Cheviot was like my crowning glory. I'll leave you with the other preconceived notion that I wanted to dispel before, but people who live in Cheviot stay in Cheviot. And as of 1 month and 2 weeks ago, I'm a resident of Northside. So I did leave after 37 years. Thank you all.
Give it up one more time for Brice. But if you're ever around my coffee, man, I'm watching you. Now we've got one more storyteller before intermission. But first, in addition to buying t-shirts or making our dip jar go ka-ching, another board member, Zach, where are you? Right over there. He'll be walking around with some cards that you can fill out, telling the world what neighborhood you identify with and why it's so great. You can also get your picture taken by the Cincinnati neighborhood poster, and if you tag True Theater in your selfie, you might win free tickets to the future show. And
if you're here with a single ticket tonight and you're thinking, man, I missed out on a chance to get a subscription to, a cheaper price to get 4 tickets, well, you could go down to the box office at intermission and turn your single ticket into a subscription for just $51. It seems like an oddball figure, but it had to be divisible by 3. But you get 1 ticket each to our January show, our April show, and our July show, the themes of which are respectively money, hands, and scams. So you're going to want to do that too. Did I have something else to say?
I mean, while you're at it, you might as well buy one for your friends too.
Yes.
Don't stop at 1. But before you do any of that, one more neighborhood. Kennedy Heights is a neighborhood located 10 miles northeast of downtown Cincinnati. The neighborhood was named after Lewis Kennedy, who had built and operated an inn there in the 1800s. It is home to the Kennedy Heights Art Center, as well as Kennedy Heights Park. With 4,847 residents, Kennedy Heights is the 23rd largest neighborhood in the city. Our next storyteller has made Kennedy Heights her home with her family. She is also a writer, comic, and singer, and tries to squeeze in a day job in there too. This is her second appearance at True Theater. Please welcome back Kate Mock Elliott.
When people ask me what neighborhood I live in, I say Pleasant Ridge. And they go, oh yeah, that's a great area, and it is a great area. The problem is I don't live in Pleasant Ridge. I live in Kennedy Heights. But if you hadn't heard of that before tonight, don't feel bad. That's why I lie. Kennedy Heights sometimes feels like the overlooked sibling between Pleasant Ridge and Silverton. So imagine you are driving down Montgomery Road from Kenwood Mall, driving south, and you'll pass a music academy, a donut shop, a brewery, a coffee shop. That's Silverton. Okay, but keep going. And then you'll come to this really cute town square. Okay, it's got like a comic book shop and restaurants and a coffee shop and schools. That's Pleasant Ridge. In between, starting at the AutoZone and ending at the really old apartments, in a moment that you can miss in a blink, that's Kennedy Heights. I recommend that you not blink. So I moved back to Cincinnati with my husband in 2013. My dad, who is the real professional in real estate, insisted that we not rent, we go straight to buying a house. And I am a woman of action. If I see something needing to be done, I do it, and I do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. We toured 20 homes in one day. Thank you. But I still remember turning off of Montgomery Road and heading up this little hill just shaded by these majestic oaks, passing this little green space that kids were playing on, and turning onto this small dead-end street and marveling how quiet it was, being just 2 minutes from the busy Montgomery Road. My dad, acting as father and realtor, walked down the street and just talked to anybody who was outside. Most of them elderly couples who had raised children in the neighborhood and were still visited by their grandchildren. I do remember driving out of the subdivision and noticing this abandoned beverage drive-through with like a crumbling asphalt lot. But right across the street from that was an art center, this pristine white estate with rolling green lawn and a welcoming front porch. If you Google Kennedy Heights, you are likely to get one of two stories: a shooting, or one of the many community events hosted by the Kennedy Heights Arts Center. And that, in a nutshell, is Kennedy Heights. It is a neighborhood striving to overcome its circumstances, always ready to make something beautiful. While I moved to Kennedy Heights in 2013, I didn't really connect with it until 2017. I was reading the bi-monthly newsletter, one of the only neighborhoods that still prints and mails a newsletter to every address in the neighborhood. And I saw a little announcement that they were looking for a new editor. I made my living in communications for nonprofits. If there's one thing I knew, it was newsletters. And I am a woman of action. If I see something needing to be done, the idea that I was expecting a child in a month was irrelevant. So for the next 2 years, I would attend community council meetings and learn what was happening in the neighborhood to put in the newsletter. I mean, I had to learn what a community council was. So there are about a couple different public perceptions of what a community council is. Some people think it is a legal entity akin to city council. It is not. Some people think it is a glorified HOA full of busybodies trying to boss around their neighbors. Some of them may be. At their core, though, they are volunteer-run organizations that act as a megaphone for the neighborhood. So imagine you want something in your neighborhood, probably a speed bump. Y'all have not seen people turn out for council meetings the way they do over speed bumps. So instead of you by yourself reaching out to the city of Cincinnati about a speed bump, you come to your community council and we look into what the process is. And then we find out, do other people want a speed bump? And then we take our city council megaphone to City Hall to request the speed bump. It's never guaranteed, but it helps. So for 2 years, in addition to writing about how to get a speed bump, I also wrote about our neighborhood events like 5Ks and community dinners and art fairs. I wrote about the donations that were needed at our neighborhood food pantry. I wrote about neighbors. I would interview neighbors like Neil and Stella, who were the first people to welcome me and my husband to the neighborhood with homemade yeast rolls, and had been in the neighborhood since 1968, had seen 3 generations of family in that neighborhood. Then, in 2019, I was at a council meeting, ready to take notes, enjoying the free community dinner that we provided beforehand. And the then president announced he would not be seeking re-election. He'd stepped in as an interim role, had served a whole term longer than planned, but nobody was stepping up to take his place. And remember, these are volunteer-run organizations. Without volunteers, there are no community councils. For that very reason, not every neighborhood in Cincinnati has a community council. And I am a woman of action. But I'd never served on a board before I reminded them, to which they said, you know, we've had presidents without any experience before, and they've done fine. So I knew my fate was sealed. Fortunately, Sharifa approached me. In addition to being executive director of our neighborhood food pantry, she'd been approached by many asking her to serve as president. So would I be interested in a co-presidency? So in November of 2019, Sharifa and I were elected co-presidents of Kennedy Heights Community Council. Yes, it was great. And it turned out it was more than just convenient. We realized later that it was a little bit symbolic, because Kennedy Heights is an intentionally integrated neighborhood. This is a phrase that you can trace back to the founding of the Community Council, a founding that just celebrated its 60th anniversary. And Sharifa is Black, and though you can't tell from her glowing skin, she's a grandmother. I am white, and at the time was a very new mother. So we were representing this integration. Kennedy Heights in its early years was, because of its out-of-the-city air and hillside views, was an escape for the wealthy. So I don't think I need to tell you it was predominantly white. Then after World War II, Black home ownership increased, and Kennedy Heights became one of the many neighborhoods to experience blockbusting. Blockbusting is one of those fun chapters in American history we don't like to teach in schools. Realtors would go door to door to white homeowners and say that the increase in black homeowners was going to cause their home to decrease in value, so they should sell now. So if you ever wonder why Cincinnati has so many naturally segregated neighborhoods, however, in 1963, what started as informal gatherings of concerned neighbors seeing this happening became a formal community council dedicated to preserving Kennedy Heights as a solidly middle-class neighborhood, accessible to all, no matter their race. And residents would literally pay for ads in the newspaper describing Kennedy Heights as the place you want to move to if you want an integrated neighborhood. And it worked. Kennedy Heights has stayed pretty diverse. It's not perfect, It moved from predominantly white to predominantly black. It's shifting closer to equilibrium now, but it could keep swinging the other way. Neela and Stella talked about it, seeing it over their 55 years in the neighborhood. But it is a neighborhood striving to overcome its circumstances, always ready to make something beautiful. So, our first order of business as co-presidents in 2019 was to make a new neighborhood plan. Neighborhood plan is a formal document, it's approved by the city, and it's like a vision for the neighborhood, what you want to see over the next 10 years. And it's useful because if the city of Cincinnati announces they're going to do something in your neighborhood, you don't have to hold a bunch of emergency meetings to figure out if the neighbors support it or oppose it. You can just point at your neighborhood plan and use your council megaphone. Our plan had expired in 2013. It was way overdue. But volunteers, overcoming circumstances, something beautiful, right? You get it. So and the process is like a year long. You gotta have steering committees and working groups, and you have to have a certain number of public sessions to make sure you're getting input from the full neighborhood. We held our very first steering committee meeting in early March 2020. I'm glad you all filled in those blanks. Now, I found out later that there were a few community councils that didn't do anything during the pandemic. And no judgment on them, those were rough times. But I am a woman of action, and we had a neighborhood plan to complete. So the council got together and we figured out how to shift this process and keep it moving during a pandemic. And by the summer, we had a plan. It was so hard. There were so many online meetings and so many emails and a lot of outdoor events and a lot of conversations about equity, right? Because Kennedy Heights is intentionally integrated. And nowadays, that means all those other descriptors that intersect with race. So age, education level, socioeconomic status. Was everybody hearing about this neighborhood planning process through our emails? No? Okay, we masked up and we canvassed door to door, passing out flyers, or we apportioned part of our budget to direct mailing so that they would know this process was happening. It was a lot. But we were striving to overcome these circumstances, ready to make something beautiful. I remember a big event in the park, Play in the Park. It's a yearly tradition, and I'm walking around trying to get people to complete a survey. Like, a band is playing Uptown Funk, but would you like to complete a survey? And this woman, an older black woman, very firmly declined to participate with me. Basically said, I have no confidence that you are going to hear me or honor what I want to see in this neighborhood. And it wasn't until another volunteer, another black woman, talked to her that she was willing to give some input. And I can't be mad at her about that. She'd been in the neighborhood for years. She had watched as the grocery store closed and the elementary school closed and the junior high closed. But now that it's trending white again, we should get excited about change. She couldn't know the conversations that as a council we were having, trying to figure out how we could, as a non-legal entity, do anything about this crazy inflating housing market. She couldn't know the number of doors we'd canvassed, trying to make sure that everyone knew about this plan, no matter their race, education level, socioeconomic status. She couldn't know that we were literally at that event trying to meet people where they are so that we could get as diverse an input as possible. She couldn't know how hard we were trying to overcome these circumstances to make something beautiful. And I think we did it, you know? Our plan was approved by the city in April 2022, and it's not perfect. We didn't reach every single resident. When was the last time you completed a survey that didn't come with the promise of a free gift card? But we have it. We have a document to show the city that Kennedy Heights is dedicated to being affordable and accessible and integrated. And that is what Kennedy Heights deserves. Like, I think it's going to make something beautiful, and Kennedy Heights deserves that. Because Kennedy Heights is Sharifa, who is still serving as president and with this quiet firmness. It is Mary, who served as interim treasurer for 2 years because no one else would take on the role. It's the beverage drive-through that closed after a few years, just like everybody predicted it would. But it's also the affordable senior housing that's gonna be developed in its place, that's been 10 years in the works. It's Ernie, our resident historian, who wrote a 20-something history of the neighborhood for fun. It's the Arts Center and the many ways it brings the neighborhood together, just like outdoor parades during COVID and Winterfest. And it's our parks, it's Play in the Park, a yearly tradition now that started just to reclaim the park from the drug activity was happening there. And now families flock there weekly in the summer. It's the Schroeder School, abandoned, vacant, stalled in development for years. It's Aaron and Abby and Amber and Eric and Christina and the care they give to communications and that newsletter. It is our beautiful parks and Kate and Karen and Michelle who dedicate their time to preserving them. It is the woman on the bus who verbally accosted me because she recognized me from council and needed someone to blame for the way her beloved neighborhood was changing that she didn't have any control over. But it's also the abandoned Kroger building that's now a thriving part of the Arts Center. That's just my Kennedy Heights, right? It is decades of joy and grief and losses and wins. It is a neighborhood striving to overcome circumstances and always ready to make something beautiful. So the next time you are driving down Montgomery Road between Pleasant Ridge and Silverton, do not blink. It really is beautiful. Thank you.
Keep it going for Kate. We're going to take a quick 15-minute intermission. I envy all the fun things you can do. You could buy a 3-show subscription, you could buy a t-shirt, you can use the dip jar, you can go to the selfie station. There's those cards you can fill out. We're going to read some of those in Act 2, but we'll be back in 15 minutes with 2 more great stories. Thanks. Preston Bell Charles III. Take it out. Folks, if you've been listening to the stories tonight and wondering, how could I tell a story at a future show? Well, you should know that our themes coming up, I said them earlier, are hands, money, not in this order, and scams. And if you think you've got a story that might fit one of those themes, or you've got a story that we just need to hear, go to our website at truetheater.org and find the Share Your Story page and reach out to us. Somebody from True Theater will get back to you. That's truetheater.org. Remember, we spell theater the fancy way, ending in R-E.
And if you just want to be sure or be reminded of what we're looking for or when a show is approaching, again, we're fancy. Look for the R-E.
Cool. Hey, we asked and you delivered. We got so many cards here filled out from people telling us what neighborhood they're from and what makes it so great. We're going to read a few of those for you right now. Marcellus is going to grab the first.
What neighborhood are you from or currently living? Norwood. What makes it so great? It's central to everything I need, and my family always looked shocked when I tell them I love it. They still think black people can't live in Norwood. LOL.
East Price Hill, close to downtown yet fully residential. Love it.
Glendale. I have about 16 different households of family from both sides living in Glendale. Everyone knows everyone and neighbors are willing to lend a hand. Very small town, Hallmark movie feel.
That kind of thing.
We don't have a Walnut Hills yet. Walnut Hills. When I moved here 5 years ago, there wasn't much besides a Wendy's and a McDonald's. Since then, it has grown into a diverse and inclusive neighborhood that promotes community and allows everyone to have a seat at the table. Love my home. Heart. Love it.
East Price Hill Incline District. Great views, free yoga, nice restaurants, friendly neighbors, for the most part.
Great, and we'll read a few more of those after our next storyteller, who I have to introduce off my phone because we had a printer malfunction. He is not representing a single neighborhood tonight, but all of the neighborhoods. With an Arts Wave grant, he completed a documentary this year called Divided Roots, Seeing is Believing, which shines a light on the 52 neighborhoods of Cincinnati in an effort to remove some of the mystery and encourage our city's residents to get out and explore neighborhoods with which they might not be familiar. This jives with our own community building mission, and so when he came to us to suggest tonight's theme, we jumped at the idea. Keep in mind, he didn't suggest the theme so he could tell a story, but we asked and he agreed. In addition to being a documentarian, he is a unique artist that has journeyed from the classical route on the violin to folk, rock, and experimental styles. He attributes his talents to God, friends, and great teachers, and enjoys assisting all artists in their pursuit of impact and expression. And we at True Theater are very fortunate that he's taken an interest in us, since even when he's not telling a story with his words, he is sharing his soul through his music. Please welcome Preston Bell Charles III.
I love you too. I'm not used to this role, but hello everybody. Yes, my name is Preston Charles, and I had the wonderful opportunity to create this documentary. It's called Divided Roots, Seeing is Believing. And I do give thanks to Arts Wave, that's why I'm wearing their shirt tonight, for that great opportunity. It was through the Black and Brown Artist Grant Award, and their goal was to fund artists that look like me, black and brown, with some funds to see if we can actually use arts in a way of healing the community. So just want to tell you a little bit of story of like how I grew up here in Cincinnati and came to that ideal. So being born on the west side of Cincinnati, didn't really know much about it except living in the 4-tower apartments. But leaving from that area, when my little sister was born and my dad finally got a job, leaving the Westin Hotel downtown and becoming in the funeral world, we got to move out to Silverton. I thought that was a great move. There was an area in the back of the house that I thought was a personal park. I found out that was called a backyard. You know, there were kids that were outside to play, neighbors that would look out of their front window at you as you walked up and down the street, just to kind of be security, but also like friendly at the same time. But I also remember going to school there and actually getting to meet kids outside of my home. You know, I grew up in a very conservative Christian household, so anything that was outside of those four walls was just not good for me. So, you know, school happens. My mom was all about education, so I was one of those kids that was really eager because it was always incentivized. If you got your work done, you could just go out and play. You know, you can just go be free from that. So kindergarten through third grade, I was like, wow, I could just rush these assignments and I should be able to play, right? And just started talking to all my classmates. I thought that was more enjoyable than the classwork. Everybody thought it was great except for my teachers. And then they also told my parents. So, you know, I was getting bored in school, didn't really know that, having a little bit too much social interaction. So I then had the opportunity to go to Eastwood. Eastwood was a magnet school. And if you don't know what a magnet school is, it's actually a school that brings kids from all different neighborhoods into one place. So I got to meet kids from all over, Madisonville, Kennedy Heights, people that live downtown, or so on and so forth. There were kids that were black, there were kids that were white, Hispanic. I had teachers that were from Mexico, actually, Senor Luz, who actually taught us Spanish. I met my first, I guess, gay colleagues. You know, I had two teachers that were dating each other as men, and so I learned about homosexuality there. I had a Muslim teacher that always wore his suit and tie every day. You know, like the people that sell the incense out in Bond Hill, that was his uniform. But it was just great to me. I was like, wow, the world just kept expanding and expanding. Then I had the opportunity to go to Seven Hills. I got to tour around the school. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Everybody seems happy here. Oh, I'm not a nerd. It's okay to learn, and everybody seems like they enjoy this. They have a fruit break, like where they get to go rollerblade and eat La Rosa's pizza. I was like, we don't have this at my school. So I get really excited to take this test and get a scholarship to hopefully go to the school, because it's like $30,000 a year. My parents weren't going to pay for one of 5 children to go to a school that expensive, or probably we just couldn't do that. So I take this test, and I'm all excited. I'm getting home, you know, to my parents, like, yes, this is going to happen. I'm dreaming about what school's going to be like. And then the letter comes in the mail, and everything's looking good. My mom's like, yep, you did great there, great there. Oh. There's an area that you didn't do well on, and because of that area, you're not going to be accepted. It was geometry, which is kind of ironic that someone else had a difficulty with that in life, but it was something I had never ran into. I was just like, what is this? Didn't think that it mattered, but it also had opened up my mind to see that not all of us learn things as kids at the same time. So there was a little bit of a difference there, and it stuck with me for a while. After Eastwood, I did finish graduating from Eastwood, and then I got to go to Walnut Hills High School, where that diversity lens opened up even further. Now it wasn't just kids from different suburbs, but different levels of economic strata. Some kids had all the new gear, some kids didn't have any gear. But one thing that came together was us as students. We were there with a common bond to learn. We all liked each other. We just considered ourselves eagles. Never really cared about where a kid came from or what school they went to before they came to Walnut. That just was kind of out of the window. And I thought the rest of the world was like that. The older and older you get, it just gets more and more diverse. So I found that not to be true. I wanted to go to UC. That was where I thought I was going to be able to flourish. I had always loved UC because as a senior, I got to go to UC parties a little bit. And I thought like I'd just be able to join a fraternity and everything would be like how my dad did. I'd meet my wife, so on and so forth. But my parents had a better idea. They thought I needed to focus, so they sent me to Bowling Green State University up north. Now, my mother, she made it through that college, and she swore by it up and down, and I was just like, Mom, what were you thinking? I found out the school was less than 0.25% black. Everybody was from small town Ohio, so I was nervous, a little upset, but I went to the school anyway. And unfortunately, 9/11 happened our freshman year, and that actually kind of brought us together because we had time outside of classes when school was kind of out, but we couldn't leave campus to talk and get to know each other. But then I also got to take one of my most profound classes. It was called Mexican Culture Studies. We had a teacher that was from Mexico, about 70 or so years old, really slender guy. He wore his pants, you know, like all the way up here. That was the style back then. And he used to tell us about the good and the bad about Mexico, how he was viewed as a youth. You know, they always thought that he was this dirty Mexican with a knife, and we would giggle about it because we never heard that as a racial term or as a racial slur, but he swore by it. But you know, it was just about this mixture of the culture, the food, but also that Mexico gets a bad rep. We might hear certain things. And that was true. If you were watching CNN or Fox or even some of the local news stations, just like they do today, they were warning about immigrants, stay away from the border towns. The drug cartels are chopping heads and stealing people. So we had these two different diverse views of what was supposed to happen down there, but we're also excited that we get to go to Mexico City for 6 weeks. So the end of the school year happens, and I remember being on the airplane, and one of the first things that kind of, I guess, started opening up my mind even more was the fact that when we were about to land in the airport, we didn't really descend. It was like, oh, we're still like up here. And they're saying we're approaching the airport. And when you looked out the window, the ground just seemed like it came up out of nowhere. If you don't know, Mexico City is actually on top of an ancient volcano inside of this crater. So you don't go all the way down to sea level or whatever. You feel like you're just going into this magical plateau that came out of the clouds. Now again, my view, I didn't know what I was gonna see. I was told that Mexico was dirty, it was filled with crime. But when we got there, their airport was more advanced than what we had at CBG. The roads, like we have roads like Vine Street and such, they have 6-lane highways that go through their downtown. Their subway system was immaculate. The culture, the museums, I didn't realize any crime. I mean, their police were really heavy duty, but it wasn't how it was described on television. I'm like, aren't these like really, really intelligent people trying to keep us safe? Like, how is this the way that they're describing? Like, how am I seeing this other beauty? So furthermore, I got to see pyramids. At Walnut, they didn't tell us there were pyramids anywhere except for Egypt. So I'm just like, why is this world not getting it right? Come back from Mexico City, I write my paper, I get an A+, but I had never forgot that moment where it was like, wow, someone else had fed a perception of how I could see the world, and if I didn't go there, I would have believed that. I might have shared that with my kids or my other colleagues or friends. So life goes on later. We're getting to 2012. I had been working in finance for 10 years, which in itself was a living hell. And fortunately, music was the passion of something that I stuck with my whole life. So I decided to leave that world. It felt like it was a calling. You know, everybody was talking about the world was about to change, 2012, you know, the Mayan calendar. And I was like, you know, I kept having this recurring dream, and this is true, that I was going to be going to this place in the mountains. I don't know how I was going to get there. I don't know if it was stress or whatever was going on, but I had this dream. And one day on Facebook, I got this message that somebody wanted me to play at their festival. And I was like, wow, I'm getting invited to play at a music festival? All right, cool. That's a pretty big step as a musician if you don't know. But the location is in eastern Appalachia, southeastern Kentucky. So I'm like, okay, this is cool. I don't know how they found me up here, but I'm still excited to go. So I tell my family, yeah, I'm gonna go out to the hills of Kentucky and I'm gonna play at this festival. My parents were just like, okay, here's our son again making another drastic life decision. You're not gonna go down there, you're gonna die, somebody's gonna kidnap you. You might get bitten by a snake. We heard they have snake churches. There's just a lot of things that were going on. You know, my mom's from Jamaica, my dad's from Cleveland, so Appalachia was just completely out of their scope. But I ended up going. I found a ride down there, and I still remember like going through these roads. There were no street lights. I think our GPS was barely working, and we had to get there before sundown. They definitely told us that. They were like, yeah, if you don't get here before sundown, you might get lost, end up on the wrong property. We didn't know what that meant. But we get there, and when we get there, I found out I'm like the youngest person to actually be there as a group of mostly elders, I guess, of the community, and I'm definitely the only black person that's there. So I'm like, okay, this is weird. My parents were right. They're probably gonna kill me and have some weird ritual after this, and I set myself up, you know? But these people were very welcoming. They taught me about apothecary. They actually knew a lot about African history in the United States, and that was a part of why they were, well, what I found out later, kind of being ostracized from the rest of the growth of America. They knew a lot about the Native American influence as well as their European roots and how all those things blended together. I got to see mountaintop removal, which is a very devastating thing to see. It makes me think twice about turning on the lights. And also got to experience people that didn't have running water. You know, there's always a general perception, which I've gotten used to, that black or brown people are generally poor. You know, the history of the United States didn't shake out the same way for everybody. But I had never seen poor white people, you know, in that type of a degree. And rather than them look at me different, like I had different views, like going into different establishments here in Cincinnati, maybe this restaurant was like, okay, is that guy gonna pay his bill? Or, you know, I'd show up at a bluegrass place and they're just like, why is he here? I didn't get that when I went down to Appalachia. Nobody looked at me different. The cops didn't pull me over or, you know, just search me just because. And because of that, I actually went back to stay there for 6 months in the wintertime. And that experience changed my life. I got to meet a family from Minnesota. They were definitely not as open-minded as some of the other people I had met, but we actually became friends. And I thought that was a huge thing. And then I was actually supported as an artist all the way from the hills of Appalachia all the way back to Cincinnati. I went down there broke, I didn't tell you guys that. So I did street music. I connected with a lot of different communities and everybody was just welcoming. I mean, I was able to sleep on people's couches, eat dinner with people's families, and I didn't grow up in their community. It was the most magical experience I could have as a young adult. But my passion was to get back home and share that same type of passion or experience, that it's okay to do that with the people here in Cincinnati. That if we actually were to let go some of our assumptions or what we think we know about somebody, we can actually open up more of our world, more about who we are, and find out that sense of community. It is okay to travel from place to place wanting to be safe. You know, if you didn't know, I do a lot of street music here in Cincinnati, but I've never been bothered. You know, I have a bucket full of money in front of me, no one tries to rob me, no one yells at me, and I'm like, wow, why does that happen? I think it only happens because I try to look at each person as a person and as a subject matter that I could possibly learn from. So that's what brought those divided roots to come together and help me be able to believe what I was seeing and not always believing what I was being told. And I think if everybody kind of adheres to that just a little bit, we would help ourselves get a lot further away from the history and the things that we're trying to let go of and get to the places that we can find ourselves together. So that's pretty much it. Yeah. Thank you.
He's a little taller than I am. Preston's documentary can be found on YouTube. His channel is appropriately named Preston Charles. And the documentary is called Divided Roots, Seeing is Believing. And don't worry, we'll post about it on our Facebook page so you'll know exactly where to find it. And now, our final storyteller and neighborhood for the night. Pleasant Ridge is a neighborhood located 9 miles north of downtown Cincinnati. It was incorporated into a village in 1891, despite having its first post office in 1832. With 8,083 residents, Pleasant Ridge is the 14th largest neighborhood in the city. Our final storyteller this evening was not raised there, but is proud to call it her home. She has been working as a professional actor for over 35 years, with stage credits that include Ensemble Theater, Cincinnati Playhouse on the Park, Cincinnati Shakespeare Company, and No Theater, in addition to working regionally. Her TV and film credits include Chicago PD, Loving, Milk Money, Dark Waters, and the upcoming film Mr. Manhattan, among others. She is also a facilitator at the Xavier Leadership Center and an adjunct at Hebrew Union College and UC's College Conservatory of Music. Please welcome Annie Fitzpatrick.
I live in Pleasant Ridge, and if you're a West Sider like me, you won't know where that is. But I hear it is Kennedy Heights adjacent, if that helps. I grew up in the west side of town, Cincinnatian, born and raised. I lived in beautiful Mount Airy. Mount Airy Park literally backed up into our backyard. So a neighborhood to me meant huge trees and tons of kids. It was the burbs. We were a new subdivision. And I knew everyone on my street, and everyone on my street knew me. So that's what it meant. Now, I don't know if it was technically illegal when I was growing up to go to the east side of town or just immoral, but I never went there. And after living in New York for about 9 years, I moved back home, and I wanted to put down roots, and I wanted to buy a house. And what I wanted in a house were trees and a neighborhood with families and a sense of community. So when my realtor brought me to Pleasant Ridge, I thought, where is that? I had to look it up on a map. But when I walked into my little brick house, 2-bedroom, I had that thing happen to me that people talk about and I thought was a myth. I fell in love. I loved that house. I felt immediately at home. So as soon as we finished touring, I jumped in my car and I drove around the neighborhood. What is Pleasant Ridge? What does it look like? And oh my God, there's lots of big, beautiful houses, lots of trees, plenty of kids running around. But even better, just a couple of blocks over, in walking distance, there were restaurants and bars and a drugstore and a UDF. So I thought, hey, if I can walk to get a drink and ice cream, this is the place for me. So I bought my house, got it all fixed up, and then I sat inside it and thought, I got my house, I got my trees, I got those families. How do you get community? I don't have a child, I don't have a dog. How was I going to meet my neighbors? Well, what I did have was a yard. And I'm on the corner of 2 cul-de-sacs. So anyone who knows me from childhood will laugh at this because I lived in apartments from my family home till I bought my house. I became a gardener. And by God, it worked. I would be out in the yard, and those people with the kids and the dogs, they would come by. And they would say nice things about my flowers, and I would say nice things about their dog or their kid. And it was a start, right? And they were friendly and nice. I thought, okay, I'm getting there. But it didn't get much beyond that. I did manage to become best friends with my immediate next door neighbor, who was also single, no kids, no dog, new to the neighborhood, didn't really know anybody. So we had a block party. He thought, this is gonna be great. We're gonna invite everybody, we'll get that community. And God bless, a lot of people showed up, and we all wore name tags. So now I knew that the nice couple with the dog were Mike and Lindsay, and that their daughter was Quinn, and I could name some people. But that was kind of as far as it got. It was a lovely party. We all said hello, went home feeling good, and the next day, I didn't really feel all that closer to my neighbors. They were all nice, but it wasn't that thing I had as a kid. And over the course of the next 10 or 12 years, I had 2 more block parties. Again, people would come. Again, we would introduce ourselves. It was lovely. Sometimes people brought food, sometimes snacks. But in the end, it didn't really change the dynamic. And I thought, well, I don't know, maybe neighborhoods are different nowadays. And then COVID hit. And the world shut down. And although I felt very isolated, again, I live alone, I get little moments of relief when I look out my window, either one on the corner of the cul-de-sac, and see my neighbors with dogs still walking their dogs, and it would give me a little lift. Or I'd hear the kids playing in their front yards, and again, a little lift. It's not going to be like this forever. And as the weeks turned into months, and we all became a little braver, when someone walked by, we would all pop out on our front porches, and we'd have conversations from the front porch to the sidewalk, which was brave at the time. And it was more than just, your dog is adorable, the flowers look great. It was like, how are you doing? What's happening at your job? How's your family coping? And the conversations got deeper and longer and about more important things. And as the weeks turned into months and many months, we did little things to help cheer each other up. kids would scroll messages on the sidewalk. And I know I would turn on my sprinkler in the summer and let it go extra wide so when the little kids could walk by, they would run through it and they would laugh, and it gave me such a boost. Then we got into the holidays and we started decorating for Halloween, which we had not really done before. And of course, Christmas, the lovely Brittany went out and put Christmas decorations all over the lampposts in our neighborhood. And it gave me such a lift. And probably a lot of other people who are not going to see their families at Christmas this year. Really lovely. But the best part was the neighborhood text chain got established. I think all of us knew like maybe one or two other people that we'd exchange numbers in case of an emergency, but now we had critical mass. And we were on there, right? Keeping track of each other, saying what's going on, occasionally offers of, do you need food? Do you need toilet paper? How are things going? How are you holding up? And as we got braver and more vaccinated, we would meet in each other's backyards, or maybe on the far corners of each other's front porches. We're bringing our own drink, but they're talking to each other at a level that I'd never been able to talk with my neighbors before. It was pretty wonderful. Maybe the only good thing that ever came out of COVID is I got to know my neighbors. So when we got closer to coming out of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk on the text chain. Should we have another block party? And everyone was like, yeah, let's do it, let's do it. And again, we had it in my backyard, and it was finally the block party I always wanted. There were kids running crazy, lots of neighbors. We all brought food in individual wrapped things to keep each other safe, but we had that connection. And I finally felt like there wasn't a group of people doing their civic duty, we were friends, and it was lovely. And this may say more about me than my neighbors, but the lovely Brittany, decorator of lampposts, brought the kids those lovely tubes of frozen juice, and she brought the grown-ups mixed drinks in lovely frozen tubes. We really hadn't had a lot of alcohol before, and to me, that made, now we were having a party, which was lovely. And we had a great time, and people took forever to say goodbye. And then two of my other neighbors, who are actually here tonight, the lovely Deanna and the lovely Kathleen, said, we gotta keep this going. And they had a beautiful fire pit in their backyard, and they started inviting the neighbors over on the text chain. Hey, we're gonna have s'mores. And sometimes we'd all bring food and be a little more elaborate, and sometimes they'd just say, hey, I'm bored, got anything going? Let's just all meet in the backyard. And we'd show up. And there's a core of people who showed up the most, but there would be always new people joining. And I felt like, yay, we got our neighborhood. It was delightful, and I felt so lucky. And then in 2022, I had my own personal COVID. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in July, and my whole world shut down. For any of you, and probably there's a lot of you out there who've either gotten that message or know someone you love who got it, it's terrifying and overwhelming, and your whole life changes, kind of overnight. So I went from being healthy and happy to, in the course of a week, having surgery, weeks of recovery, months of chemo, and it wasn't fun. Nobody who has cancer has any fun, but I was miserable. And because I didn't tolerate the chemo, which is a nice little word for going into anaphylactic shock the first time you get it, I didn't do well. And instead of being sick maybe 1 or 2 days a week, I was sick more like 4 or 5, occasionally 6. And I don't know about you, but when I don't feel well, when I'm feeling nauseous, I'm like a bear in a cave. I just curled into a ball on my couch. And even though I have a lovely, big, giant, loud Irish Catholic family, the best parents in the world, the best big sister in the world, who's also here tonight, who took great care of me, I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to go anywhere. And because of my condition, my immune system was kind of in the toilet. So I was back to COVID, wearing masks. I wasn't supposed to go out in public. I wasn't supposed to see anybody. It was very lonely. And I was lying on the couch, again, I would hear little kids playing out in the yard, and it would give me a little lift. And I could hear my neighbors talking to each other as they're walking their dogs, and again, I get that little lift. But most importantly, the text chain. I wouldn't want to answer the phone, I wouldn't want to get up, but every time I heard that little ding, I get a message from my friend saying, hey, I'm at Kroger's, do you need anything? I'm at the Home Depot, I'm gonna head over to Target, what do you need? I'm going to the post office, can I drop anything off? Do you need me to come mow the lawn? How are you doing? Just those little things were about all I could deal with in that moment, but oh my God, what a lift it gave me. And I don't know that any of them really know how powerful that was. It's a little embarrassing to admit that a little tweet could just lift your day, but they were amazing, and they got me through it. So my last chemo was the end of January. I actually went on and I did a play at Ensemble that next month with not very little hair, no eyebrows and no eyelashes, but I did it. So I thought, okay, I beat cancer, I'm on my way. And the minute that show closed, I spent the next week on my couch. I thought, well, that's okay. I was exhausted. I'm gonna need to sleep, that's fine. And then the second week, I was still sleeping 14 hours a day, and I was watching 10 hours of television, and I was telling people I couldn't go places just because I didn't want to meet anyone. And I started to think, what's going on with me? I'm so lucky. They caught my cancer early. I'm over the worst part. Why aren't I doing something with this second chance I got in life? But I didn't feel lucky. I felt terrified. And I'd gotten so much help from so many people, I was embarrassed to ask for more. But I would wake up in the morning with my shoulders around my ears, overcome with anxiety. Is the cancer gonna come back? What if I lose my insurance? I don't know what to do. And again, loving family, good doctors, but I was too embarrassed to tell anyone. I'd never felt that low. And after about 6 weeks of this, Kathleen and Deanna had one of their beautiful fire pit parties. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna get out of bed. It's only 2 houses away. I'm gonna walk over, I'll say hi to everybody, and then I'll just make an excuse and go home. And by this point, I was pretty good at making excuses. So I walked in, I saw my lovely neighbors. They all said lovely, nice things. I gave them my standard, I'm doing great. I'm so lucky, they caught it early. My hair's growing back. And as I was making my excuse and heading away, I bumped into Brittany, the decorator of lampposts and the bringer of frozen drinks to the party. And she said, how are you doing? And I gave her my standard line. And then she said, how are you really doing? And I don't know if it's the way she said it or I was just at the end of my rope. I told her all of it. My anxiety, my fear, my depression, how stupid I felt for not taking advantage of my second chance at life. Why wasn't I more joyful? And she turned to me and she said, you know I work for the American Cancer Society, right? She had told me that years ago when I first met her, and I just had forgotten it or filed it away. But she said, you know, what you're going through is really common. We're about to do an initiative on this. People who go through cancer, when they get through the worst of it, suddenly it hits them in a different way, and it's like post-traumatic stress for cancer survivors. And the minute she said that, I felt like this giant weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. Oh, that's what's happening. This is not happening because I'm lazy or I don't care or I'm ungrateful for my second chance. I'm still in the healing process. And I'm so immensely grateful that she told me this. And quite frankly, at many of these, full disclosure, many of these fire pits, the lovely Dave would come as well, because he's good friends with Kathleen and Deanna. And that's how I got invited to tell my story. And I jumped at the chance because I wanted to spread the news. What Brittany had told me, I didn't know. I wanted to tell other people. Because once she told me, I did gradually tell my friends and my family and my doctors, and I got the help I needed to get all the way well. But if it wasn't for my neighbor asking those 2 questions, or 1 question over and over again, I don't know where I'd be. So when I first walked into that lovely little house and fell in love and felt like I had a home, what I didn't realize was that I also would find a village. Thank you all, my Pleasant Ridge family.
Keep it going for Annie. And one more time for all our storytellers tonight. Leslie, Brice, Kate, and Annie.
And Preston Bell Charles III.
Everybody at Memorial Hall, all our volunteers and staff helping us out tonight, backstage, taking pictures, selling t-shirts, all of you. If the projector was working, there'd be a long list of names of connectors and volunteers and donors. Those of you watching online can probably see it. It truly does take a village. Folks, we've been so happy to bring you stories tonight. We'll be back here again on January 25th for True Money. We hope to see you then, but until next we see you,
Be true.
good night.
Thanks.